There was also beheadings too.
His nickname with ISIS was Abu Huzaifa al-Kanadi. Last September, on a promise to keep his identity confidential, he revealed to us how he traveled to Syria and joined the ISIS morality police. Back then, he said he witnessed horrific acts, but never killed anyone himself.
Canadians shouldn't see me as a threat because of the reason I grew up with them, and Canada has a huge role in what I am now too.
But now we're hearing a different story. On the New York Times podcast, Caliphate, Abu Huzaifa said this.
This guy was a drug dealer. I had to stab him in the heart. The blood was just, it was warm. And it sprayed everywhere. And the guy cried, was crying and screaming.
Huzaifa described taking part in a kind of execution of men who resisted ISIS. Now, we have John Lancaster joining us right now because, John, you originally spoke with Abu Huzaifa for CBC, and you tracked him down in Toronto today to confront him about this apparent confession. So when you did that, what happened? How did he react?
Well, we put it to him several times directly, Andrew. How could you say these things if you didn't actually do them? He says he doesn't deny saying them, but he's insistent that he didn't actually do those things. He says he was interviewed for this podcast quite a while ago, back in 2016, 2 or 3 weeks after he'd returned from Pakistan after fleeing Syria and fleeing ISIS. He said at the time he was suffering from PTSD, having flashbacks from the horrors he witnessed, and using hard drugs to essentially try to self-medicate to get these demons out of his mind. When I pressed him, though, again, I said, these are very graphic details you've described. How is it that you could describe in such detail, yet you didn't do it? He told me I was describing what I saw. He said, basically, I was close enough, Andrew, to think it was actually me.
Okay, and so what is the situation now exactly? I mean, he's in Toronto?
Yeah, we walked into this suburban Toronto restaurant, and he looked over his shoulder, saw us. At first, he smiled, then realized why we were probably there. This isn't someone who looks like an ISIS soldier. He's a 23-year-old man studying at university, clean-cut, well-spoken, very soft-spoken, and in fact, at one point, actually broke down in tears today when discussing this. It's clear he's hoping to move on to his life, but it's not clear if that's going to happen, especially after these latest revelations.
Right. So, John, I mean, he gave you an explanation, but given what he has apparently confessed to, has he been approached by police?
He's been interviewed several times, he said, by police. Shortly after we interviewed that interview in 2017, he said he was contacted by the RCMP, who figured out who he was and where he was. But he said since then, nothing. Today, though, after these podcasts surfaced and were aired and raised in the House of Commons, he said he got a call from CSIS, and they plan to pay him a visit next week, Andrew.
Okay. John Lancaster reporting tonight. Thanks very much.
Okay.
Now, at this point, you may be asking, why aren't we revealing who this man is, given the severe nature of what we just heard? Well, let's start from the beginning. Abu Huzaifa trusted the CBC to protect his identity. That's something we take extremely seriously. But trust is a two-way street. And the New York Times podcast clearly contradicts what he told us on some pretty critical details. So we are now trying to nail down the truth and may revisit our arrangement with him. Meanwhile, as you heard, his identity is known to law enforcement, and so far he has not been charged with a crime. As the story evolves, we will keep you updated. But that hard facts on Huzaifa may be hard to come by didn't seem to stop the fallout from spreading in Ottawa. Evan Dyer takes us there.
This brought some pointed questions for the government today in the House of Commons, with Conservatives asking, how can a man who brags about committing war crimes for ISIS be walking free in suburban Ontario?
This individual described how he executed individuals by shooting them in the back of the head. He said that the people he was shooting deserved it, and he said, I know I won't be held accountable. He said that at least twice.
What I can say, Mr. Speaker, is that CSIS, the RCMP, and all the related security and police agencies of this country are doing their job and taking all of the steps necessary to ensure that justice is enforced.
But that's not good enough. This guy is apparently in Toronto. Canadians deserve more answers from this government.
Absolutely.
Why aren't they doing something about this despicable animal?
One former CSIS analyst says returnees like Abu Huzaifa are an example to other would-be jihadis.
The guys that return are heroes. They've been there, done that, got the T-shirt. They've amazing exploits on behalf of a terrorist group, and they act as inspiration for others. So if nothing happens to this individual, and he deserves his day in court, don't get me wrong, this should be a fair and transparent process. But if nothing happens to him, the message is it's okay to join a terrorist group, which is an offense. It's okay to travel abroad, which is an offense. It's okay to kill somebody, which is an offense. And nothing's going to happen to you.
It's important to note that whether Abu Huzaifa committed this murder or not, he's also confessed to several other crimes. Just traveling to Syria to join ISIS is a crime that carries a potential 10-year sentence, although to date, no one's been convicted of that. Evan Dyer, CBC News, Ottawa.
And on that note, there is another question here. If we look at the big picture, how many others like Abu Huzaifa might be out there? Well, according to a 2017 government report, there were about 190 so-called extremist travelers with links to Canada suspected of engaging in terrorist activity abroad. And the government is aware of about 60 that have returned to Canada.